my deepest sympathies to the comparator family and my sincere wishes for Mr. Copenhaver and Mr. Dutch's continued recovery. Before I begin, I want to commend the heroic action men and women of the United States Secret Service on July 13th. Our special agents shielded the former president with their bodies while shots were still being fired, selflessly, willing to make the ultimate sacrifice without hesitation. I am extremely proud of these actions and those taken by the counter-sniper team to neutralize the threat that prevented further loss of life. And I applaud the actions of our tactical teams that responded so quickly. I would also like to express my gratitude to our federal, state, and local partners. We rely on these critical relationships, which have developed over decades of daily collaboration to secure protective events and conduct criminal investigations. As you're aware, there are multiple ongoing investigations of the attack and the security failures that occurred that day. I pledge my full support to those inquiries so the secrets, your committees, and of what happened leading up to and during July. I will wait for the results of those findings to assess where we failed them, and will continue to take immediate steps to ensure we do not repeat those failures. Since my appointment as the acting director 1 week ago, I identified gaps in our security on July 13th and have implemented corrective actions. One of my first actions as acting director to better understand how our protection failed. I went to the roof of the AGR building where the assailant fired shots, and I laid in a prone position to evaluate his line of sight. What I saw, an officer and a 25-year veteran with the Secret Service, I cannot defend why that roof was not better secured. To prevent similar lapses from occurring in the future, I directed our personnel to ensure every event site security plan is thoroughly vetted by multiple experienced supervisors before it is implemented. It is clear to me that other protective enhancements could have strengthened our security at the Butler event. As such, I have directed the expanded use of unmanned aerial systems at protective sites to help detect threats on roofs and other elevated threats. I've also directed resources to facilitate our protective site communications, particularly our communications with our state and local partners. In addition, I have instructed the asset request for Secret Service protective details to be approved expeditiously and have ordered the maximum use of requested personnel at protective sites to address this heightened security environment. I've heard your calls for accountability, and I take them very seriously. And given the magnitude of this failure, the Secret Service's Office of Professional Responsibility is reviewing the actions and decision-making of Secret Service personnel in the lead up to and on the day of the attack. If this investigation reveals that Secret Service employees violated agency protocols, those employees will be held accountable expeditiously and have ordered the maximum use of requested personnel at protective sites to address this heightened security environment. I've heard your calls for accountability, and I take them very seriously. And given the magnitude of this failure, the Secret Service's Office of Professional Responsibility is reviewing the actions and decision-making of Secret Service personnel in the lead up to and on the day of the attack. If this investigation reveals that Secret Service employees violated agency protocols, those employees will be held accountable to our disciplinary process. With respect to congressional investigations and requests for information, I instructed my staff to provide full cooperation and respond expeditiously on a continuing basis to ensure you have the information you need to conduct your critical oversight. In my testimony before you today, I will provide details on the Secret Service's advanced security planning for the Butler Farm Show site. Facts as we know them regarding the incident itself, known breakdowns in executing the security plan, and corrective actions that the agency is taking to ensure that nothing like this happens again. But I do not believe that inadequate time to plan for this event was a factor in the failure. As you saw in my written statement, I am prepared to provide an overview of the security planning leading up to and during the July 13th attack. However, I would like to point out that based on what I know right now, neither the Secret Service counter sniper teams nor members of the former president's security detail had any knowledge that there was a man on the roof of the AGR building with a firearm. It is my understanding those personnel were not aware the assailant had a firearm until they heard gunshots. Prior to that, they were operating with the knowledge that local law enforcement was working an issue of a suspicious individual prior to the shots being fired. I regret that information was not passed to Congress and the public sooner with greater frequency. And I fear this lack of information has given rise to multiple false and dangerous conspiracy theories about what took place that day. And I want to debunk these theories. Let me address one conspiracy directly. The Secret Service counter sniper neutralized the assailant within seconds after the assailant fired his weapon. That counter sniper had full discretion to use deadly force to stop an attacker and did not need to seek authorization to fire. I am immensely proud of the selfless dedication of our employees to the mission. Every day across the globe, the men and women answer the call to protect our nation's leaders, and the standard is no fail for a reason. During our current high operational tempo, I want and I need to ensure that the Secret Service workforce are uplifted so they can focus on carrying out the mission. They have my full support, and I'm confident in their abilities to ensure the safety and security of the people we protect. They are worthy of trust and confidence, and they deserve your support as well as the support of the American people. Chairman Peters, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Paul, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committees, thank you for the opportunity to testify at this joint hearing. I will submit the remainder of my statement for the record, and I will answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Our second witness is Paul Abbate. Mr. Abbate is the Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation at the Department of Justice. In this role, Deputy Director Abbate oversees all FBI domestic and international investigative and intelligence activities. Prior to his appointment as Deputy Director, he has had a distinguished 3 decades within the FBI leading counterterrorism efforts, and most recently as the Associate Deputy Director of the FBI, where he's responsible for the management of all FBI personnel, budget, administration, as well as infrastructure. Mr. Abbate, thank you for appearing before the committee here today. You are recognized for your opening remarks.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Chairman Peters and Durbin, Ranking Members Paul and Graham, and distinguished members of the committee. It is a privilege to appear before you today to discuss the FBI's investigation of the attempted assassination of former President Trump on July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania. Before going further, I want to again offer my and our condolences to the victims of this heinous attack, to the family and loved ones of heroic firefighter and father Corey Comparator, to Mr. Dutch, to Mr. Koppenhaver, who continue to recover, and to former President Trump, who was also struck by a bullet fired from the shooter's rifle. Our thoughts and prayers are with each of them and their families and loved ones. Within minutes of the attack, the FBI field office in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, received notification of the assassination attempt and responded to the scene immediately with a surge of resources, quickly moving forward on the investigation. From the outset, the FBI has been investigating this attack as an assassination attempt and an act of domestic terrorism. Our team continues to conduct a full, thorough, and objective investigation, and will continue to follow all leads and avenues of investigation to logical conclusion, leaving no stone unturned. While it's not typical to provide details of an ongoing investigation, this, as we all know, is an extraordinarily tragic set of circumstances of the utmost national importance, making it essential to inform the American public and Congress what is known right now with full transparency. The investigation remains focused, of course, on determining motive, identifying any potential co-conspirators or others with knowledge of the attack, and building out a timeline of shooter Thomas Crook's actions in advance of and during the attack. Thus far, though absolutely nothing has been ruled out, the investigation has not identified a motive, nor any co-conspirators or others with advanced knowledge. To date, the FBI team has conducted more than 460 interviews, executed search warrants, including at the shooter's residence, and seized electronic media to include phones, laptops, hard drives, and thumb drives. Legal process has been issued to dozens of companies, and we've received more than 2,000 tips from the public. The full resources of the FBI have been brought to bear in furtherance of the investigation. Agents, analysts, professional staff, experts. I've personally visited the site of this horrific attack and seen firsthand the work of FBI Pittsburgh and our partners on the front line, and want to thank all involved for their ongoing and tireless efforts to get the answers that we need and to deliver justice. Specialized resources deployed included evidence response teams, victim services specialists, laboratory and operational technology division resources to process physical and digital evidence, a shooting reconstruction team. Additionally, our explosive experts have analyzed the 3 IEDs recovered, 2 from the shooter's vehicle, 1 from the family residence. And our behavioral analysis unit, importantly, is helping to build a profile of the shooter to include his mental state. Next, I want to provide a brief highlighted overview of the timeline that has been established to date through witness interviews and other information. Again, this is our understanding at present and is subject to change and further refinement as more facts are collected. On July 3rd, the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania was announced. On July 6th, the shooter registered to attend the rally and performed a search for, quote, how far was Oswald from Kennedy? On July 7th, the shooter traveled from his home to the Butler Farm Show grounds and remained there for approximately 20 minutes. We assess this shows advanced planning and reconnaissance on his part. On July 12th, the shooter traveled from his home to the Clairton Sportsman Club, where he practiced shooting. On the morning of July 13th, at approximately 10 a.m., the shooter returned to the farm show grounds and remained there for about 70 minutes before returning home again. At approximately 1:30 p.m., while at the residence, the shooter's father gave him a rifle for the purpose he believed of going back to the sportsman club. About 25 minutes later, the shooter purchased ammunition while en route to the Butler Farm Show grounds. The subject then arrived at the scene and was moving around the farm show grounds close to the American Glass Research AGR building, from which he ultimately committed the attack. Shortly thereafter, at approximately 3:51 p.m., the shooter flew a drone approximately 200 yards from the farm show grounds for about 11 minutes. The drone and controller were later found in the subject's car. Analysis has not revealed any photos or video taken by the drone, but we can confirm that he was live streaming at the time and would have been able to view it on his controller. The first reported sighting of the shooter by local law enforcement was at approximately 4:26 p.m. At approximately 5:10 p.m., the shooter was again identified by local law enforcement as a suspicious person around the AGR building. And at approximately 5:14 p.m., a local SWAT operator took a photo of the shooter. At about 5:32 p.m., local SWAT observed the shooter next to the AGR building using his phone, browsing news sites, and with a rangefinder. At approximately 5:38 p.m., the photo of the shooter taken earlier was sent to local SWAT operators in a text message group. Subsequently, approximately 25 minutes prior to the shooting, the U.S. Secret Service command post was notified of a suspicious person. Officers lost sight of the subject from approximately 6:02 p.m. to 6:08 p.m., but continued to communicate with each other in an attempt to locate him. Recently discovered video from a local business shows the shooter pulling himself up onto the AGR building rooftop at approximately 6:06 p.m. And at approximately 6:08 p.m., the subject was observed on the roof by local law enforcement. At approximately 6:11 p.m., a local police officer was lifted to the roof by another officer, saw the shooter, and radioed that he was armed with, quote, a long gun. Within approximately the next 30 seconds, the shots were fired. The evidence recovery team found 8 shell casings at the scene next to the shooter's body. We believe that the shooter, fired 8 rounds. While the investigation has not determined motive, the investigative team continues to review information from legal returns, including online and social media accounts. Something just very recently uncovered that I want to share is a social media account which is believed to be associated with the shooter in about the 2019-2020 timeframe. There were over 700 comments posted from this account. Some of these comments, if ultimately attributable to the shooter, appear to reflect anti-Semitic and anti-immigration themes, to espouse political violence, and are described as extreme in nature. While the investigative team is still working to verify this account to determine if it did in fact belong to the shooter, we believe it important to share and note it today, particularly given the general absence of other information to date from social media and other sources of information that reflect on the shooter's potential motive and mindset. These are the facts, in part, that the investigation has revealed to date. While the shooter is dead, our work is very much ongoing and urgent. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any and all questions.
Thank you, Mr. Abbate. We'll now proceed. Chairman Durbin and Ranking Member Graham will ask the first two questions. I will then ask question Ranking Member Paul, and then after that, we will alternate between members of the judiciary, recognized by Chairman Durbin, and members of the Homeland Security Committee, recognized by me. With that, Senator Durbin, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Senator Peters. I would like to begin by making a statement that it's not in the form of a question, and you'll understand why when I say it. In 20 days, we're going to start the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. I have been briefed by the law enforcement agencies plans for security for that event. Tens of thousands of people will be there, including some of the highest ranking politicians in the United States. I trust that both of your agencies can answer in the affirmative if I ask you whether you're actively engaged in working with the development of security plan, taking into consideration the lessons of July 13th.
Senator, that is 100% yes from the Secret Service.
Yes, from the FBI as well, sir. We've been working on this for well over a year in preparation.
I'm not going to ask for details for obvious reasons, but I do want to ask a question about the Secret Service staffing. Congress has nearly doubled the budget for the Secret Service over the last 10 years, from $1.8 billion in fiscal year 2014 to $3 billion in fiscal year 2024. Despite this large increase in funding, the number of agents in protective operations has fallen from 4,027 to 3,671 during that same time period, an approximate 9% reduction. Acting Director Rowe, what accounts for protective operations losing 356 agents over the past 10 years?
So, Senator, with respect to where we are today on staffing, and then I'll address the 10-year where we were. In this year alone, we are going to end the year on the positive of 200 plus agents. That's the first time in a number of years that we've been able to do that. Part of that was gaining some efficiencies in our hiring process. But what I want to re-emphasize is that we have not dropped standards. Only 2% of every applicant actually makes it through the hiring process. We are filling our classes at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and we are doing this ramp up as part of what lies ahead of us with the LA Olympics in 2028. With respect to what has happened in years prior, this is a difficult and challenging job, being a Secret Service agent. Living your life by somebody else's schedule, constantly away from your family, constantly having to meet increased operational and investigative demands, which we gladly do, but it's not for everyone. And I think there are times where people have to make tough choices and they decide to leave the agency. But that doesn't mean that they were any less of an agent or that they weren't committed to the mission, because we are all committed to being patriots and serving our country and protecting our nation's highest leaders. I think there was a variety of factors. Some of it was the pandemic. Some of it was, the economy or other opportunities. We have people that are very skilled in cyber that often leave the job. Some of the protective skills that they acquire are also in demand in the private sector. But some of the mechanisms that we put in place just in the last year is also retaining our workforce. And that's what we are focused on right now.
The Government Accountability Office has determined that restaffing from these losses have been slowed due to a number of factors, including the years-long background checks for prospective agents and the assignments agents must work through before being assigned to protection. Given these constraints, what steps have you taken to improve recruitment?
So we're actually putting out targeted recruitment opportunities. So we've just recently put it out for within our uniform division for our counter sniper unit, our hazardous agent medical emergency response unit, our counter assault team on the special agent side. So we're actually trying to gather the best and the brightest. And I will tell you that we are having great success with a lot of these vacancies. But what I want to reiterate is that, for example, on the counter assault vacancy, we had 700 applicants that applied for this. Really, what we will glean after they make it through the process, and they have to be able to hold a top secret SCI clearance. If we realize 15 out of that tranche, that's a 2% pass rate. So it is very competitive. And we are trying to make sure that we are getting the best and the brightest without dropping standards.
One last question for either one of you. What is the purpose of a rangefinder? And once this assassin was identified as using a rangefinder, wasn't that proof positive that he was a dangerous individual?
So I'll say, Senator, that obviously somebody is trying to determine where they are in proximity to a location, a fixed location. I'll defer to my colleague here, but I believe it was a recreation or sports related. I thought I had read that it was a golf range finder. Nonetheless, it still would have provided him the ability to provide the distance that he was away from his intended target.
Wasn't that enough?
As far as raising suspicion,
Yes,
I think he was identified as being suspicious by local law enforcement.
and nothing happened.
Well, I know that local law enforcement was attempting to locate him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Member Graham.
Thank you. Let's go back to the resources. Do you need more money?
Senator, listen, there isn't a single branch, or a single agency in the executive branch that that needs more money. Everyone would take more resources. We've had a great relationship with the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of Management and Budget.
Do you feel constrained to ask for more resources by anybody?
No, sir, we don't. And actually, we have a great relationship with our appropriators and obviously the authorizing committees. And they have always looked out for the Secret Service.
So I would encourage you to think big when it comes to resourcing the department in light of what happened here. At the time of the shooting, the Iranians were threatening high-level American officials, including President Trump, right?
Senator, it's widely
Is that
known.
right? FBI.
Yes, Senator, that's 100%
Did that
correct.
factor into the security footprint?
So, Senator, what I will say is that it is widely known that the Iranians do not like us. I would refer you to the
Well,
national
it's not
security.
that they don't like us. They threaten to kill certain people and they named them.
Correct, sir. But I can't publicly
It's not
comment.
like, I hate America. I'm going to kill these three guys.
I cannot publicly comment, sir, on.
Well, they publicly comment on it. I mean, it's not
But
what.
Senator, what I'm trying to say is I cannot publicly comment
Okay.
on what
Fair enough.
intelligence, but I
Fair
can
enough.
assure you that we do a threat-based protective model.
I'd like to have that model provided to the committee. Could you do that?
Yes, sir.
Could you also give us the protocols that are in place to secure a site like this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. One, the protective detail around President Trump, I know them all very well. They're brave men and women. And these questions is not to belittle anybody. They're trying to find out how the system fails so badly. You say you're not reluctant to ask for more money. What do we need to do to make it easier to hire people without lowering our standards? I mean, I know it's a hard job. Can
So-
we do anything to help you?
So I think we're willing to take that back, sir. I think we're working on our time to hire. We've
Well, if you had
actually,
more people, you'd have more time off.
that's true, sir.
Okay,
Yes.
well, let's get more people, more time off. These are tough jobs. I mean, people on this committee know.
Yes,
I don't
sir.
know how they hold a family together doing what they're doing. It's the military really on steroids. The encrypted app. Paul, can you tell us about these apps? Have they been broken into? The guy had some apps that were encrypted.
I think we've experienced a range of returns on this. Some of the applications that he was using online were encrypted in nature. Some of the email accounts.
Have we
that he
broken
was,
into them?
We've received returns. There are some that we have not been able to get information back because of their encrypted nature.
Is
That's
there any way to
true.
solve that problem?
Sir, Senator, we've talked about this before. We need a solution that provides lawful access to law
So
enforcement.
you're telling me the guy that took 8 shots at the president, former president, has apps that we can't get into that may, if you could get into, reveal some relevant information.
That is correct, Senator.
So if he were talking to some foreign power, and I don't think any foreign power would hire this guy, by the way. So I'm not overly worried this was some great plot by the Iranians because they couldn't even think of this. However, there could come a day where something like this is very important. How do we solve this problem?
Senator, as we've been saying, we need a solution that provides lawful access where when we go to
So
a
you're telling
company,
me, I agree with you. I'm not blaming you. We have encrypted apps of an assassin, a murderer, and we can't get into them all these days after. That needs to be fixed, folks. I'm all for privacy, but to a point. What if in the future somebody's using these apps to communicate with a foreign power? I think we need to know these things. We need to know them in real time. So lessons learned is that everything failed. Corrective action seems to me you need more money and more people. Accountability. At the end of the day, how many people do you think will be relieved of their duties, Mr. Rowe, because of this?
Senator, I publicly cannot, and I cannot weigh in on that right
Sure.
now, right? It has to be a fair and neutral
Absolutely.
process.
From a
right?
fair point of view, would you say this is a major system failure at every turn, and those in charge of the system in question, not only was it embarrassing, they failed?
So Senator, again, if there were policy violations, those individuals will be held accountable and they will be subject
Just
to
send
our
us the
table of penalties.
policies if you could.
Yes, sir,
Thank
we
you.
will. But they will be held to our table of penalties, which
Thank you.
will include up to termination.
Thank you.
Director Rowe, in your testimony here today, as well as in your written testimony, you said very, very clearly that you can't defend why that building with the shooter on top of it was not better covered. You were very clear. You cannot defend that. So my question to you is, my understanding is that there's a detailed site survey that is done prior to an event to identify potential threat points. So talk to me about that site survey. I'm sure you've had a chance to look at it now after action. And how did that site survey get approved when it was so clear that that was a major threat from that building?
Thank you, Senator. So our Pittsburgh field office did the advance. During that advance, not only were they discussing amongst themselves about mitigating the line of sight, but also they were discussing with other agencies that were supporting it. Our counter snipers met with their counterparts. The team lead and team lead met. They walked the site. They identified the AGR building. And if I may, Senator, if I could point out something right now, if I may, and we will place this for the record. But this is the point of view. This is from the second floor of the AGR building. This point of view is the point of view where the counter sniper team locally was posted. The gold arrow indicates where the shooter fired from. Looking left, Why was the assailant not seen? When we were told that building was going to be covered, that there had been a face-to-face that afternoon, that our team leads met, this was the view. Let me show you another view, Senator. B. This view is a reenactment by one of my agents. Laying flat. There was a 5-inch rise on the middle of that roof. The assailant would have had to present his bore over that to get his shot off. The view underneath reflects the perspective that he would have had. Again, I call your attention back to the first exhibit if they'd have looked left. Give me C. This is what our counter sniper team saw. Shooter, no elbows. You barely make out the crown of his head. Below it, the assailant up prone. And let me just tell you, our counter sniper, this individual, I know him. I consider him a friend. He has covered me operationally in conflict zones. And when I did my time on the president's detail, he exemplifies the courage, the skill, and the ability to respond under great stress in such short time to neutralize the threat and prevent further loss of life. Getting back to your question, Senator, these were discussions that were had between the Pittsburgh field office, the local counterparts, and everyone supporting that visit that day. And that's why when I laid in that position, I could not, and I will not, and I cannot understand why there was not better coverage, or at least somebody looking at that roof line when that's where they were posted.
Director Rowe, the Secret Service, state and local law enforcement were on multiple communication channels, is my understanding, during that time. And as a result, local law enforcement was only able to call in to a state command center that was then relayed from the Secret Service. This seemed to be a recurring issue in emergency situations that we're finding with the federal government, that there's not a seamless way to communicate, particularly if you're relying on local law enforcement to deal with what was clearly a major vulnerability. Local law enforcement in Butler told my staff that they had no way of communicating directly with the Secret Service. And if I listened to Mr. Abbate saying there was about 30 seconds between when the local law enforcement reported that there was a man on the roof with a gun, 30 seconds, if it's communicated directly to a counter sniper team, would that be enough time to react prior to the firing of those shots?
Senator, if we'd had that information, they would have been able to address it more quickly. It appears that that information was stuck or siloed in that state and local channel. I will tell you, though, that there were our tactical elements did have, not only did they have embeds from Butler County ESU with them, but they also had radios on the tactical net. It is troubling to me that we did not get that information as quickly as we should have. We didn't know that there was this incident going on, and the only thing we had was that locals were working an issue at the 3 o'clock, which would have been the former president's right-hand side, which is where the shot came. Nothing about man on the roof, nothing about man with a gun. None of that information ever made it over our net.
So that will change?
Yes, sir. We are working right now to figure out the interoperability and also make sure that we do have access to those channels, whether through a counterpart system or some other means.
Very good. Ranking Member Paul, you're recognized for your questions.
Director Rowe, I'm encouraged by your attitude and what you brought here today, what you've talked about as far as immediate changes that you've made, and I hope you'll follow through with that. I'm encouraged by the fact that you acknowledge that it's indefensible that the roof was unattended. Would you say the roof being unattended breaches standard protocol for setting up a security perimeter?
What I would say, Senator, is that that roof should have had better coverage. and we will get to the bottom of if there were any policy violations.
I would think indefensible would go along with breaching protocol, and I can't imagine how indefensible would not be breaching protocol. What I would caution, though, is that I sense, and you're the Secret Service, and these people are your friends, and they are heroic people who do good things, that we can't let our friendships blind us from responsibility. So someone's in charge of the security at the zone. Would the Secret Service be in charge of the entire operation, and they work with law enforcement, but they're in charge? The person in charge of the entire operation is the Secret Service, not the local police.
You're correct, sir. This is a failure of the Secret Service.
So that's what I mean. And look, I don't wish anybody harm. I appreciate the bravery of the Capitol Hill police. I was at the shooting at the ball field. I've heard 100 shots coming my way. Fortunately, none came to me. But I appreciate the bravery of all the people who protect us. But there's also the idea that there are certain mistakes that don't make you a bad person, but they're just inexcusable. If you made that mistake. So, for example, let's say you determine, well, local police should have been on there and they told us, and local police says, no, they didn't tell us to do it. And it's a he said, she said. Still, ultimately, the agent in charge should be walking the grounds and say, there's a roof 100 yards away from the stadium with a clear sight. Someone's got to be on the roof. Local police, I told you to get on the roof. Get on the roof. Or you put the Secret Service. So ultimately, the buck doesn't pass along to somebody. Whoever's in charge is in charge. But really, I think it would be helpful to all of us. I know the process has to be meted out, but there needs to also be a process for protecting the next Trump rally. The fact that whoever was in charge in Butler next week is not in charge of a rally in Las Vegas. And so I think you really should say that. You should simply say that the leadership from that event is going through a process, but until that process, they won't be in charge of the Democrat National Convention. That would reassure a lot of people that they won't be in charge of security until it's determined. Can you tell us something to that accord?
Yes, sir. So I can tell you that the team planning the Democratic National Convention, that is a national special security event. That team has been on the ground. That's from DC with support from our Chicago field office. But I just want to reiterate that our Pittsburgh field office staff, they are wearing this harder than anybody right now in the Secret Service. They feel completely demoralized. And what I'm trying to do is also let them know that, listen, they need to be focused on the mission at hand. I also have to walk a tightrope here and make sure that I'm not
I
tainting any future,
from
discipline
point,
action.
I understand, and I have great respect for all the officers, but ultimately someone had to be in charge and someone made a terrible error, and it's an error of judgment. The big error is the roof. But another big error is we have 90 minutes of a suspicious person. Now, Senator Durbin mentioned the rangefinder. None of these are enough to shoot a suspicious person, but they certainly, you would think, would be enough to stop the proceedings. That's where I think you get to the second major management or judgment error of this. Now, Trump's done probably 100 rallies like this. How often at one of his rallies are there 90 minutes of looking at one person and at least a half a dozen pictures of that person? How often does that happen? And is it against protocol to let a proceeding go on when you've got a suspicious person, 90 minutes worth of people talking about this person, and we don't stop the proceeding? Does that defy protocol?
So Senator, while there's 90 minutes in total from when he's first identified by local law enforcement, we have about a 30-minute window. But at no time is there anything ever communicated about weapon or harm. And I think that's where the threat.
A weapon, you shoot people with a weapon.
Sure.
Without a weapon, we're talking about people you stop and say, he had a backpack, which was probably big enough to have the AR-15 in it. In all likelihood, the backpack has the weapon in it. So a guy with a big backpack would never get through the perimeter. So once again, a big mistake was not having the perimeter wide enough to prevent people from shooting outside the perimeter. But the thing is, he would have never gotten through the perimeter, right? His backpack would have been checked. But people with big backpacks are very suspicious. And I would think he's been seen 6 times, but you got 20 or 30 minutes of knowing about it. But the thing is, there's all kinds of chatter going on about this. And you would think the chatter going on with the local police is on a police radio, and a policeman with that radio is standing in the control tent, so you get that communication. So there's a huge and massive breakdown. But really my question is, how often has this happened at other rallies where there's a half a dozen pictures and 90 minutes of people talking about a suspicious person? I just can't imagine that it's real common.
So, Senator, at rallies, there are people that come to the attention of law enforcement for a variety of reasons. If they come to our attention for some other activity that might, put it a little bit, hey, we probably need to go check that individual out. This happens, and that's why we attempt to locate them. That's why it's important for us to try to find them. And it's important to have the information. And so local law enforcement did their very level best to try to locate him. They did provide us the photos 30 minutes prior. It just, he evaded any detection by law enforcement.
But once again, it's the overall person in charge. It's a terrible breakdown. It's a terrible management decision not to have stopped. There was a chance to stop the proceeding. And the question is not whether there's enough information to take down an individual. It's a much lower standard to say, hey, we're going to wait until we get this individual. The roof and the 90 minutes of it, both I think are failure of your protocol. And I think when that's determined, the person who made these decisions can't be in a position of authority again.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for holding this hearing. I appreciated Director Rowe when we had the classified briefing, and also today, taking responsibility for the agency and your own personal emotion and reaction to your visit and what had gone wrong. For the people in my state that keep asking me, I just don't get how he got on the roof. I know we've gone through great details and a lot of examination. Could you just give a minute on what went wrong and how you think it can be fixed? Because I think it's just going to help to dispel the conspiracy theories. There's some people that think it didn't really happen, which of course is completely ridiculous. It did. There are some people that think all kinds of conspiracies went on within the government, which is also false. But could you just tell them what went wrong so they understand?
Thank you, Senator. I thought long and hard about this. I think this was a failure of imagination, a failure to imagine that we actually do live in a very dangerous world where people do actually want to do harm to our protectees. I think it was a failure to challenge our own assumptions, the assumptions that we know our partners are going to do everything they can, and they do this every day. But we didn't challenge our own assumptions of, we assume that someone's going to cover that. We assume that there's going to be uniform presence. We didn't challenge that internally during that advance. So moving forward, I've directed that when we're talking to people and we're making requests, we are very specific of what we want. We are providing explicit instructions on exactly what our expectation is and what we need them to do and what we want them to do. That's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward beyond this. And let me just tell you that our state and local law enforcement partners are the best. So this belief that somehow they are less than federal law enforcement or they're less than the Secret Service. They're out there patrolling communities every day. They're the ones out there going into hazardous conditions every day. They know their communities. They have the ability to enforce state and local laws. Our advanced agents do not.
Right.
We need them, and we need them to be partners with us. And I think we need to be very clear to them, and that may have contributed to this situation.
Yeah, appreciate that. Same respect. Next, one of the things you mentioned to me was, and to all of us, was in this other briefing, was just the texting protocol. And I think a lot of us think about this in non-security settings, about how people are just texting all the time instead of talking, and how it takes their eyes off, in your case, the target. Could you talk about what might have gone wrong there and how you think things could change when there's the hope is that their eyes are constantly on the scene and on the potential targets and risks?
Thank you, Senator. So again, we need people focused on the problem or on their area of responsibility. It was great that there was a text chain, but that communication needs to go over the net. It needs to go over a radio channel. so that everyone has situational awareness of it. The point I was making in the closed door briefing is that we have to get to a point now where we are using our radio systems to have that collective awareness of this. I think, one of the things that I've directed is that in addition to the interoperability, we're going to roll out common operating picture, a common operating platform that we utilize for national special security events. We have the ability to roll that out to the field that has a Blue Force tracker in it that's able to, where you can put where all your state and local assets are, where our federal assets are. But in addition to that, I want people using the radio. So it's great that the tactical elements are talking to each other. It's great that the shift is talking to each other, but we have to be able to make sure that whenever we come across a situation, that everyone has situational awareness of this. And I will take this, in my time when I was operational in the president's detail, we were given the explicit instruction, hey, if you're going to pass it, if it's relevant enough that you feel like you need to pass that information, do it over the radio. And that was the protocol that we had. And I think over the years, perhaps with the advent of technology and smartphones, perhaps we've gotten away from that. But we need to get people back on the scope, back on mission, back focused on what they need to be responsible for.
Okay, and the next question I'll put in writing. Thank you very much of you, Mr. Abbate, but it's just pointing out that we've seen this rise in threats against members of Congress, which of course is relevant to this. 8,000 just last year, more than 4 times over the past 7 years. I'll want to ask you in writing about the steps that the Justice Department is taking to prioritize these cases. I know there's been some changes made.
Yes, Senator, it's of our highest priority, and we're urgently working on it 24/7 every day to protect each and every one of you here.
Appreciate it. Thank you, both of you.
Senator Carper, recognized for your question.
Thanks very much. Mr. Rowe, Mr. Abbate, thank you for joining us today. I have the privilege of representing Delaware, the first state to ratify the Constitution. We did that over 200 years ago, and the Constitution sort of outlines how we elect our leaders. And it changes with respect to technology over the years. But there's, for as long as we've been a country, threats to our leaders when they pursue elective office. We're going to be gathering some of those. We got a gathering in Chicago in just a few weeks. Others will be gathering in other parts of the country to help make sure that what was adopted in that original Constitution is actually carried out faithfully. And it's just incredibly important that those who aspire to elective office and those who take on those challenges are protected, and their families are protected, as well as those who surround them. I share with my colleagues my prayers for those who have been killed or injured on July 13th. We're grateful that one of our presidential candidates is okay. But I have a question about what I can't get over how a 20-year-old loner could somehow outsmart two of the smartest federal agencies and state agencies and law enforcement with an odds of like 1,000 to 1, and be able to almost pull this off. It just blows my mind. Hopefully we'll get to the truth in all of that. I'm a Navy guy. I spent many years of my life in the Navy. I learned as a midshipman that when the ship runs aground at sea, the commanding officer is held responsible. Whether the commanding officer is awake or asleep at the helm, but the commanding officer is held responsible. And I think we have to make, at the end of the day, I'm not interested in a blame game, but I'm sure interested in finding out who was responsible and making sure that they account for their responsibility. My question is, what policies are currently in place to facilitate real-time information sharing between the Secret Service and local law enforcement during an event? And what changes to information sharing practices will the Secret Service make in light of the apparent breakdown in communications on July 13th?
Thank you for that question, Senator. So we're looking at our procedures. We rely on a counterpart system, and the radio interoperability it's a complex challenge. It's not just about being able to find whatever frequency our local counterparts are on and then just piping it in. There's some technical challenges that have to be there. So to alleviate that, we've always relied on a security room where we have representatives from the local agencies. Those individuals are there to, one, bring their own radio and then relay relevant information that would impact our security plan. I think what I'm looking at, and again, what I'm in looking at this situation is there was a unified command post, and we had our security room, and we had communications that day at the Butler Farm site were challenging. Not just challenging for the Secret Service, but for challenging for locals. There were some cellular issues. There were radio issues, and you saw that with the testimony from the colonel from Pennsylvania State Police last week in the House. So I think as I'm thinking about this, I think we need to consider what is our model moving forward. And I think we need to be where the greatest amount of partners are when that information is being discussed. The other thing that I'm looking at is we need to also make sure that we have redundancies as far as cellular on the ground or additional repeaters. And so I've directed our Chief Information Officer to do that, and we are rolling assets out now supporting campaign sites.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Bay, quick question. Based on the initial information you've gathered from the investigation, do you believe there were any actions taken by the shooter in the weeks, days, or hours leading up to the shooting that should have caused alarm and grabbed the attention of law enforcement?
He did not have any interactions with law enforcement leading up to this, Senator. We haven't found anything yet that would have alerted law enforcement or FBI or Secret Service to his intention activities in advance of this event. I will note, however, to your prior question, that we do have a very strong relationship, an integrated relationship between FBI and Secret Service and every other federal, state, local agency you can imagine. We have constructs like the Joint Terrorism Task Forces and Violent Crime Task Forces where we're cross-embedded with each other. And when it comes to this event and others like it, we're always talking in advance. In fact, with respect to this event, we did have a meeting between U.S. Secret Service and FBI in the days leading up to the event to assess whether there was any information or intelligence pertaining to a threat against the rally or to former President Trump or anyone else there. There was an absence of that in the lead up specifically. And again, none of us had any information in our holdings with regard to the ultimate shooter.
All right. Thank you for that. Thanks very much, both of them.
Next on the Senate Judiciary Committee is Senator Grassley.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce my oversight letters and investigative documents into the record. This is information I've already made public.
Objection.
Okay, thank you. I'd also like to call my colleagues' attention to a legislation that Senator Cortez Matos and I've introduced would require Senate confirmation of the Director of the Secret Service. I think this is very important because no other agency has a no-fail mission. Mr. Rohr, in your written testimony, you stated that that to prevent similar lapses like the one on July 13th from happening again, you'll ensure every event site security plan is thoroughly vetted by multiple experienced supervisors before it's implemented. Based on your testimony, the security plan for the Butler event deviated from the Social Security standards. How would vetting by multiple experienced supervisors fix that?
So, Senator, I think having many eyes on a particular problem set helps. That way you don't have tunnel vision. You just focus in on one thing. And so that's why I think it's important, not only at the field office level, but also at the detail level. And part of what we had started doing with the former president's detail is having them send out site agents, having them send out supervisors. And I think having that collaboration and having additional eyes to examine the problem will make sure that we're not missing anything. And I think I want that surety for myself. And I think
you've answered my question.
Yes, sir.
Go on. Also to you, in your written testimony, you stated that you, quote, regret that information wasn't passed to Congress and the public sooner and with greater frequency. What's your communication plan going forward to ensure that the American people in Congress are fully informed?
So Senator, we just started a rolling production that is bicameral. So we made our first rolling production last week. We made one yesterday. We will continue to do that. And my view is that sunshine is the best disinfectant, and we intend to provide information to Congress as it carries out its oversight function.
Okay, also to you, I made public documents that show Secret Service deployed a counter unmanned aerial system operator on July the 13th. According to the Secret Service, the drone system was supposed to be operational at 3 p.m. that day. However, we've been told by Secret Service that because of cellular bandwidth problems, it wasn't operational until about 5:20 of that day. If the system was operational, Secret Service would have had the ability to detect the shooter and his own drone use. Why is the Secret Service dependent upon local cellular network? Does the Secret Service have a backup plan in place?
Yes, thank you, Senator. And that is something that I briefed in the closed door. And again, something that has cost me a lot of sleep because of the eventual outcome of the assailant. That what if we had geolocated him because that counter UAS platform had been up? It is something that I have struggled with to understand, and I have no explanation for it.
Okay.
It is something that I feel as though we could have perhaps found him. We could have maybe stopped him. Maybe on that particular day, he would have decided this isn't the day to do it because law enforcement just found me flying my drone. People fly drones all the time on the peripheries of our sites. And we go out and we talk to them and we ascertain what their intentions are. On this day in particular, because of the connectivity challenge, as you noted, there was a delay and he flew his drone at 3:51 approximately. So moving forward, we are leveraging resources from the Department of Homeland Security and others to make sure that we have dedicated connectivity so that we're not reliant on public domain, so that we can ensure that whatever assets we have in place, those assets are operational. And that is my commitment to you that we are going to make sure we're going to do that. And that is something we are moving out on.
Thank you, and I hope that you'll answer some of my other questions in writing.
Senator Johnson, recognized for your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Acting Director Rowe, in our secure briefing last week, I made the point that if you don't want conspiracy theories to spread, you need to provide information. You know, I appreciate these photos today. These things could have been released literally within days, and a whole lot more information as well. So Congress needs to provide oversight. We don't have certain investigatory tools like you have, but what we can do is do interviews. So Acting Director Rowe, did you receive our letter from July 25th requesting interviews with 13 individuals of the Secret Service?
We are in receipt of that letter, Senator.
And I don't, Director, or Deputy Director Abbate, have you seen that letter as well? Do you know who we're requesting interviews with?
Senator, I have not seen
Okay.
the letter.
Do you know whether those individuals submitted to interviews with the FBI? Acting Director Rowe.
We're in the process. Those employees are being interviewed if they have not already been interviewed, sir.
Are those interviews being transcribed?
The FBI interviews, sir?
Yes. But we have 302s on those.
Yes, Senator, we
Okay,
will.
when will Congress get those 302s? When will we get those transcriptions of those interviews?
Senator, I'll take that back and we'll get those to you as soon as possible.
So Acting Director Rowe, when will those individuals be made available for Congress, for this committee to interview them?
Senator, we'll make them available.
How soon? Because memories are short. They can be influenced by events. We need these transcribed interviews as soon as possible.
We will get that done, sir.
Does the Secret Service use encrypted communications at events?
On our radio nets, we do, sir.
Are those memorialized? Are those saved?
The radio traffic from Butler, we did not have recordings.
Do you normally?
Not on the road outside of DC or outside of a presidential or vice presidential stop.
So communications between Secret Service agents will not be available like we've gotten the communications from local law enforcement.
I'm sorry, Senator.
So we're not going to be able to get those communications. You didn't save them,
No, sir. And
which is very unfortunate.
it is, sir. And moving forward, I've directed that we will now start recording those so that we will have them moving forward.
And by the way, I'm going to ask for a number of things at the very end to be entered in the record, but one of my preliminary findings was that the Secret Service did not attend the 9 o'clock briefing the day of the event. In your testimony, you said that the site briefing was conducted with Secret Service personnel and law enforcement partners supporting the event. Those both can't be true. So local law enforcement do not believe Secret Service was present at the 9 o'clock briefing. Were they or were they not?
So, Senator, with respect to the snipers that went on national television and gave an interview and said that they did not get a briefing from the Secret Service, they were supporting through mutual aid, and our personnel briefed the tactical team leader was leading that element that was providing this counter sniper.
Acting Director Rowe, you said that the Secret Service provides explicit instructions to the locals. Were explicit instructions provided to cover the roof of the AGR building and locals just not follow it, or were those explicit instructions not provided?
It's my understanding what was communicated is that the locals had a plan and that they had been there before.
So an awful lot of the chatter on social media has to do with is there partisanship in the Secret Service, providing coverage for some individuals and none for others, about Secret Service coverage or additional coverage enhancements being denied. Was there ever requested additional coverage for Mar-a-Lago?
Senator, we have provided additional resources to the Mar-a-Lago.
Was coverage asked for and denied ever?
I'll have to research that, Senator, but I'm happy to tell you we have made significant investments since the former president has left office. Over $4 million of technology, resources, and alarms.
Documents will come out eventually to make the point one way or the other. This is an important piece of information that Congress needs to have.
Senator, we'll make those available to you, the investments we've made.
There's a report today by Susan Crabtree of Real Clear Politics saying that you denied sniper coverage outside of driving distance to D.C. Is that true?
That is a false statement, sir.
Well, that is incorrect.
That is incorrect.
Okay, I mean, that's the kind of information you need to refute with documentation. Deputy Director Abbate, you said this is an assassination attempt and domestic terrorism. It's obviously assassination attempt. Why make the distinction? What is different about that?
We think it's important to cover all the possibilities here and the reality of what we're dealing with and what we've all seen, Senator. And we've learned lessons from the past. The tragic shooting at the baseball field was referenced here. We've learned the lesson from that. That was not opened properly, and we've made changes in the Bureau, and it's reflected here in terms of how this investigation is being approached with a completely open mind and inclusive of all the possibilities, including domestic terrorism.
I fear that makes the investigation potentially partisan. Mr. Chairman, I would like to request that my July 14th letter to Attorney General Garland, Mayorkas, and Ray be entered in the record. It asks for all kinds of information, documentation, asks a lot of questions. My preliminary findings of July 21st and July 23rd, including timelines, a bunch of questions as well, be entered in the record. And then our updated timeline dated today. This goes not only by minute, by second. And we will continue to update this timeline as more information becomes public. This is the way you do investigation. We need to find out literally second by second what happens. So the American public understands the truth.
Without objection, so ordered.
Senator Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to both of our chairman and ranking members for holding this incredibly important hearing critically for the American people to understand the safety and security that is being provided to our national leaders. Thank you both for being here and for, again, answering the hard questions. This is a time of, I think, heightened attention, deservedly so, not only for our national leaders, but for the teacher who decides that they're going to go and participate in their democracy, or the firefighter who wants to hear the voice and vision of the potential next leader of this country. My thoughts and prayers really are with those Pennsylvania families who have lost loved ones or have been critically injured. As I offer my questions today, it would be in service to those, to preventing future incidents. But in the one question of looking backward to the event on the 13th, Director Abbate, can you just talk a little bit about how did Mr. Crooks, how was he able to get an AR-15 onto the roof of that building? Does your investigation illuminate anything that we have learned to help to make that point more clear?
We don't have definitive evidence yet as to how he got the rifle up there. Based on everything that's been collected thus far, photos, video, eyewitness accounts, we do believe he likely had it in the backpack.
Broken down in the backpack?
We're still assessing that. Our laboratory has looked at the rifle itself and measured that against the backpack itself. And if placed in this backpack, it would extend outside. It would have been visible. We don't have anyone who observed him with the backpack with a rifle barrel or other part of it sticking out of the backpack. But the rifle would not have fit fully into this backpack to be concealed and whole. We have video that was recently found of the shooter walking in a distance from his car just before 6 p.m., about 5:56, I believe. And based on everything we have, we assess that he returned to his vehicle at that time, got the backpack, and then proceeded back to the area and to the AGR building. And then he's observed, of course, on the roof, just minutes later, holding the backpack in front of him. In fact, there's dash cam footage from a police vehicle that shows him briefly traversing the roof with the backpack in front of him. And then it's just minutes after that that he's actually seen by the officer who I described with the rifle on the roof. It's possible that he broke the rifle down, though we don't have conclusive evidence of that, and took it out of the bag on the roof in those moments before and reassembled it there. That's one of the theories we're looking at and working on right now.
Thank you for that. You take me right, Acting Director Rowe. Thank you for your years of dedicated service and jumping in a hot time. But you take me right to this point of communication. There's been a lot of conversation about and even in your written and verbal testimony, you have talked a lot about the communication and the disparate nature in which it's happening across the different channels. One sort of foundational question that I have is, are all elements of an event communicated on the same channel? If I lost my kid and I'm at a big rally, are local law enforcement talking on the same channel about me losing my kid that they're talking about a suspicious individual?
So when it comes to the locals, they likely have some type of common channel that they work off of in a county or an adjoining municipality. When it comes to the Secret Service, we do have various channels for various agents and our uniformed division officers working specific aspects of that advance.
So it's not possible that the delay in communication or the losing of the thread of tracking this individual was sort of lost in the commotion of all of the other communications that could have been, or maybe was separate from the communication channels that were happening.
Senator, I can only speak to the Secret Service lines of communication, and we did not have anything beyond suspicious person that was communicated to us.
Last question really quickly, because I'm out of time, but Acting Director, was there any communication with the Secret Service that was talking directly with the former president's detail? That feels like there's been some question by colleagues about why the call wasn't made to delay the event. help us understand the communication that either was or was not happening directly with the president, former president's detail to make the call to delay 10 minutes. When we've all been to these events, they never happen on time. But to delay while this was being investigated.
So the detail, they were operating on their net, which our security room was monitoring. But again, having information of a suspicious individual, there were other calls that day of individuals that came to the attention of law enforcement, of people that needed medical attention. So it really, that particular regarding the assailant, that never really rose to a level of we should not put him out there. Had we known that there was a dangerous individual out there, we would never let a protectee go out on stage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Heston, recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Chairman Durman and the ranking members for holding this joint hearing today. And thank you to our witnesses, not only for being here, but for your careers of service to our country and to the men and women you lead. I am really grateful that former President Trump is safe and extend my sympathies to the family of Corey Comparateur, who was fatally shot at the rally, and my sympathies to everyone who was injured. On July 13th, major failures nearly led to the assassination of a presidential candidate who is also a former president of the United States. The Secret Service has to be fully transparent about how this happened and how it's going to change moving forward, understanding there's also a need to balance Congress's engagement in oversight with allowing law enforcement to conduct an ongoing criminal investigation. I want to thank the agents of the Secret Service for selflessly acting to protect elected officials and their families and our former presidents. We're grateful for their sacrifices and their service. And I want to thank all law enforcement, and particularly law enforcement officers and first responders who worked to minimize harm to the crowd on July 13th. Mr. Rowe, I want to start with you. New Hampshire hosts many political rallies. Protecting the speakers and attendees at these events requires extensive coordination between state and local law enforcement, the Secret Service staff, and obviously campaign event staff. As a former governor, I've experienced some of the challenges that this type of coordination can create, but we know that this coordination is really essential to public safety. It's clear that there were significant coordination failures on July 13th. You told us earlier that the local SWAT team told the Secret Service that local law enforcement had eyes on the AGR roof. But there are reports that members of a local SWAT team never met with the Secret Service in the days before the Butler rally. What steps does the Secret Service take prior to political rallies to ensure that the agency is effectively coordinating with the candidate security details, with state and local law enforcement, and with campaign event staff?
So as part of the advanced process, Senator, as happened in Butler as well, there's a police meeting, and basically that is that initiates the advance. That's bringing in all the not only emergency management officials, but all the state and local law enforcement agencies that may have aspects of supporting or assisting in that advance and on that visit. The focus of that police meeting, one, is to exchange numbers and business cards, and then coordinate times for walkthroughs. There were walkthroughs of the Butler Farm site with local law enforcement agencies that were supporting that visit. And that was directly as a result of having that police meeting to begin the process of figuring out, dividing up the labor areas of responsibility.
So what you're telling me is that at that meeting, the Secret Service, the first meeting led to the walkthrough that the Secret Service does with local law enforcement, and that at least some members or directors of the local SWAT team would have been part of that process?
Well, as I understand it, the Beaver County, they were seconded to assist Butler, but the Butler ESU team were part of the advanced process.
Okay. How many agents did the Secret Service provide to plan and secure this event? And how many people from state and local law enforcement agencies supported the security of this event?
So in totality, between law enforcement, state and local and federal, there are 155 personnel at the Butler Farm site that day. all combined Secret Service. It's in the 70s. And then we had support from Homeland Security investigations that were providing post standards. And then we had approximately 70 or so various Pennsylvania state law enforcement.
Okay, thank you. I want to go to one other issue before my time expires. You've talked today and in our secure briefing about the interoperability of the Secret Service's counter drone capability, that it failed early on, and so it didn't catch the drone flown over the site by the shooter. First, what changes you've addressed this a little, but what changes is the Secret Service making to ensure that it has backup technology? But also, what efforts did the Secret Service undertake to coordinate with other law enforcement regarding anti-drone capability at the rally site?
We're working to determine that right now, Senator. We're getting the redundancies in place. Counter UAS authority, it is a little complex. State and locals don't necessarily have this ability to do that. And it does require coordination with the FAA because it could impact commercial travel.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'm just going to follow up. And I think one of the things that you're hearing from a lot of folks, but I'm not sure we're really clear on yet, is how is it that somebody who clearly is arousing concern from law enforcement isn't identified as suspicious, and how is it that that information doesn't get to the president, the former president's detail? So I'll follow up in writing. Thank you.
Senator Cornyn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Rowe, can you explain why the shooter's drone worked?
Because there was no counter UAS present, sir.
Well, you had a drone system, but you had bandwidth problems. The bandwidth apparently was adequate for the shooter's drone, but not for the Secret Service. Can you explain that?
I have no explanation for it, sir.
We also know that in the military context, electronic warfare or jamming capabilities are commonly used on the battlefield. Does the Secret Service have jamming capabilities or drones?
We have drones, sir, and when it comes to, I have to be very careful about how I answer this one in an open forum. What I can tell you is that we have technical security measures, sir, to address, I think, what you're asking me.
Well, the question is, can you take down a suspicious drone? Because this can be used not only for surveillance by the shooter, which obviously it was here, but also drones can be weaponized and be used as a threat to the president, or in this case the President Trump. Do you have the capacity to stop a weaponized drone?
What I will tell you, sir, is that we have technical security measures that we utilize at permanently protected sites. We also have the ability in a limited fashion at temporary sites. What I can tell you is that on this day, the counter UAS system had technical difficulties and did not go operational until after 5 o'clock.
So in this case, the shooter had a rifle, but somebody who wanted to kill a president for a former president or candidate for president would not need a rifle. They could use a drone, correct?
It is a potential threat vector.
So this individual was identified as a suspicious person. Can you explain to us when a suspicious person becomes identified as a threat?
Well, I think it's also when a weapon or some other dangerous item is then presented.
A rangefinder would not render someone a threat as opposed to somebody who was under suspicion?
I think the rangefinder is what initially brought him to the attention of local law enforcement.
And why would the president be allowed to take to the stage while a suspicious person had been identified and before the Secret Service or local law enforcement were able to investigate the circumstances?
So at that time, Senator, suspicion had not risen to the level of threat or imminent harm.
Well, you didn't, ultimately, that suspicious person did become a threat. Do you think if the president had been asked not to take the stage and during the time it took to investigate, to eliminate that suspicion, that wouldn't that have been the appropriate way to deal with it?
Senator, it certainly is one way to do it. This is a challenge for law enforcement in general, is that being able to, you identify somebody that comes to your attention and you're trying to determine what are their intentions. This is a challenge for law enforcement. The individual came to the attention for suspicion. He's on the outer perimeter adjacent to the secured site. Law enforcement is circulating for him. But again, without additional information, at that point, we're not rising to the level yet where perhaps we should pull him off or delay him.
And I'm just suggesting that maybe, just maybe, President Trump's appearance should have been delayed while that suspicion could be adequately investigated. But I've always thought of the Secret Service as the best of the best when it comes to their willingness to put themselves in harm's way to protect the life of their person they are detailed to. And I think you described the very rigorous process by which people are screened. And I think you mentioned the 2% standard. People who are interested in serving, only a very small fraction of those individuals are actually accepted in the Secret Service because of the high standards that your agency has. But explain to me why the Secret Service, being an elite law enforcement agency, would delegate to local law enforcement or others who did not meet that same 2% standard. In other words, isn't that something that Secret Service should have covered as opposed to delegating it to local law enforcement?
So Senator, again, this is where I went back to earlier when I said it was a failure to challenge our assumptions. We assumed that the state and locals had it. By no means do I want to diminish the commitment, and I'm sure you agree, state and local law enforcement do their jobs every day and protect the communities that you represent.
No doubt about it.
So I think what we made an assumption that there was going to be uniform presence out there, that there would be sufficient eyes to cover that there was going to be counter sniper teams in the AGR building. And I can assure you that we're not going to make that mistake again. Moving forward, I've directed our Office of Protective Operations that when our counter snipers are up, their counter snipers are up and they're on the roof as well. And we do this all the time with our colleagues in the New York City Police Department when we cover the United Nations General Assembly. And so that is our TTP moving forward.
Director Rowe, I would just submit to you that those assumptions can be lethal.
Senator Scott, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me just follow up with what Senator Cornyn has asked. Do you know who makes the drone that the Secret Service uses?
That Secret Service uses?
Yeah, the one that that didn't work. Who's the manufacturer? Is it American-made manufacturer?
I believe it is, Senator.
Can
I'll get
you
you
let me know?
we'll provide that to you in a queue for sir.
So we talked about this the other day. There's not in our, very few times in history do our presidents get shot at. So you know that this is something that the American public is very interested in. So as Senator Johnson said, there's a lot of questions being asked. I was at church Sunday and 3 people came up to me and asked me if there was a second shooter. So there's all this information that's not, you guys are not responding to. When I was governor of Florida, I had 2 mass shootings. I had the Pulse nightclub shooting. I had the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting, and we did 2 or 3 times a day, local, state, and federal law enforcement, FBI, everybody involved. We answered questions. What I asked you the other day is, why aren't you doing that? What you've allowed, what both of you have allowed, you've allowed the public to ask, assume the negative. And so which I don't get. I think you should have been doing, and I think you guys should have been doing all along, at least once a day press conferences. I think that you've got to tell the public what's going on. Having a hearing is really nice. But I think, how often are we going to do this? You're clearly not going to do it here for another month and a half. So I asked you the other day, why aren't you doing press conferences? And are you going to commit to doing press conferences? I think what you all said the other day, you're going to ask Secretary Mayorkas and Director Ray if you guys could do those daily press conferences and start giving the public information. And what's the answer?
So Senator, that's why, one, I'm here today. I'm here today to provide information and answer those questions. And we are moving towards doing more frequent releases of information. And we are willing to do that press conference. And once we get through this hearing today, we are going to, in all likelihood, do one this week.
Okay, so what's the commitment to the public that you're going to do press conference? Are you going to, it's what, 17 days? The information, we are sitting 17 days into this and I'm getting asked questions that I can't believe are true, but the public believes it's true. So what you all are doing is you're ruining your reputation, you impact the integrity of the federal government. It makes no sense to me. So are you going to commit to, are you going to do it once a month? Both, and the FBI, the same thing, not just you. What did Director Ray say? Did he say you couldn't do it?
Senator, if I may jump in here, first, thank you all for your guidance in this regard. And in fact, we haven't done something every day, no doubt about that. But, we're focused from the FBI side on the investigation part as we laid out here today. We actually, based on your guidance, we did a media engagement, not a stand-up type press conference just yesterday, and laid out in full everything that I've shared here, and even beyond that, just in the interest of time. But we are, because of the intense interest in this and the implications and the national importance, we've literally provided everything through media and through journalists and here, all of the information that we have derived from the investigation thus far. We remain committed to do that in full, answering any and all questions and sharing any and all information we obtain.
Do you guys realize the value of going in front of the press and answering all their questions? You realize that if you don't do it that way, everything gets filtered. You get to put out all the information, and you should be providing. You should be every day say, this is what we know now. This is like Senator Johnson put together a timeline. You should have put together a timeline. You should immediately put out, this is what we know right now, and this is what we don't know. Like you've said, you don't know how the gun got up there, right? You've said it, but why have that should have been out all along? Say, we're looking at it. It doesn't make any sense. We've done this. We've done this. We've done this. If you do, I just don't get it.